Batya, what's on your radar?
So on Sunday, CNN's Brian Stelter addressed the wave of violent crime sweeping across American cities. Or rather, Stelter addressed the wave of violent crime he says is not sweeping American cities. The CNN host referred to violent crime as, quote, imagined drama cooked up by Fox News. Take a listen.
If we go to the Foxverse, let's take a look at the imagined drama that Fox News presents every day. Let's cue the scroll. These are just some examples of the banners on Fox News in the past few days. You get the sense that America's gone to hell, declining quality of life. America as an apocalyptic hellscape. That was one of the actual banners. This is a narrative that's both anti-Biden. It's also anti-Democrats who run urban areas.
You get the sense that America has gone to hell, Stelter said. Yes, there is a crime problem, he conceded, but the way it's described on Fox, you'd be afraid to leave your house. Here's the thing. Millions of Americans are afraid to leave their houses. Poor and working class Americans and Black Americans living in inner cities that have become veritable war zones are terrified of the rising crime that they are seeing in their neighborhoods every single day. And they aren't imagining it, though there's no shortage of journalists trying to gaslight them about it. The U.S. murder rate rose 30% between 2019 and 2020, the biggest single-year increase in 100 years. Aggravated assault rose too by 12%, and 12 major cities broke annual homicide records in 2021, 5 of them surpassing 2020's highs. In New York City in January alone, a teenager working at Burger King was killed, a woman was pushed to her death in front of a train, a young man died trying to save another from gang violence in the subway, a baby was shot in the face by a random bullet, and 5 officers were shot, 2 of them killed. In Philadelphia, 41 children were killed in 2021. 261 children were the victims of gunfire in Chicago, and they were 4 times as likely to be Black than white. George Floyd's 4-year-old niece, who marched for racial justice along with a nation horrified by her uncle's murder by police, was shot in the torso while asleep in her bed. By the grace of God, she managed to survive a punctured lung and 3 cracked ribs. Tell the parents of these children that this isn't hell. Of course, the journalists on CNN panels aren't afraid to leave their homes. Throughout the 20th century, journalism went from being a blue-collar trade to an elite, highly educated, and well-paid caste. If journalists used to live in working-class neighborhoods and see themselves as the people outside of power demanding justice for the little guy, today journalists by and large live in the most expensive cities in America and not in the areas where crime is skyrocketing. This status revolution in American journalism is why journalists call the violent crime wave invented drama. They aren't lying. The truth is just invisible to them. They simply cannot fathom the fact that babies are being shot in their beds in neighborhoods just a few miles from where they live. It might as well be another country. The truth is, the media blackout on crime, like so much of what passes for political debate or racial division, is actually about class. It's poor and working class Americans who are facing down carjackings and shootings and violent robberies while being gaslit by CNN and in the pages of the New York Times by overeducated white liberals safely ensconced in neighborhoods where no one is afraid to leave their homes, by people who take Uber to avoid violent subways. Why is crime proliferating? We once made the mistake of trying to solve crime with racist and discriminatory over-policing and a war on drugs. But today, white liberals are responding to spiking murder rates with the exact opposite mistake. Progressives are voting in district attorneys who campaign on not prosecuting crimes. Democratic politicians are ignoring the daily murders and robberies and carjackings of their poorest constituents. And when they aren't totally erasing crime from view, leftist journalists and activists are routinely downplaying it. And in their attempt to right the wrongs of the past, which is important, and protect the rights of the accused, which is important, progressives are erasing the victims of crime, which is terrible. High on the aroma of their own virtue, rich white elites with acres of their own private property are voting in politicians and prosecutors who allow the homeless to rob poor children of their parks and beaches, the only outdoor space where they can play. People with 2 Mercedes SUVs in their driveway are voting to allow mentally ill people to threaten working class people riding the subways and buses that they themselves would never dream of using. In the name of racial justice, progressives are sentencing poor Black children to live in neighborhoods where bullets fly into their little beds. Progressive prosecutors like George Gascon in Los Angeles, Chisa Boudin in San Francisco, Kim Foxx in Chicago, Larry Krasner in Philadelphia, and Alvin Bragg in Manhattan have all in their campaigns and their tenures emphasized pulling back on prosecution. Boudin campaigned on a decarceration platform and has made good on that promise. Charges for theft and petty theft declined by double digits under his watch. Over in Chicago, Fox dismissed all charges against nearly 30% of felony defendants in her first year in office. Fox and Boudin both said shoplifters would only face misdemeanor charges for anything under $1,000 or $800 of theft. And in New York, Alvin Bragg ordered his prosecutors to stop seeking prison sentences for armed robberies, drug dealing, and gun possession. Progressive newspapers catering to highly educated elites, like the New York Times, want you to believe that the tension over how to handle crime, quote, reflect a broader political argument between centrist Democrats across the nation looking to soothe voters worried about crime, and a movement of progressive prosecutors that has pushed for more lenient policies to make the justice system more fair and less biased. The truth is almost exactly the opposite. This fight is as much about class as it is about crime because the two are deeply connected. Believing the nonsense spewed by the Times that allowing poor people of color to be victimized makes the justice system, quote, more fair and less biased. A Brahmin left is voting to send career criminals back onto the streets where they act with ratified impunity. And it not only allows crime to proliferate, but it forecloses on the possibility for police reform, something that we desperately, desperately need. The disconnect between what working class Americans want and what the elites who claim to speak for them are offering reflects the larger divide in the Democratic Party between white progressives and moderate people of color, and whether progressives' right to their feelings of virtue will outweigh the right of poor people of color to live unmolested by crime. But the backlash has begun. New Yorkers are demanding that their new mayor, Eric Adams, who campaigned on making the city safe again and went on to win 63% of black voters and the majority of those without a college degree, make good on his promise. He's now walking back some of his predecessors' post-George Floyd defund the police type policies, and even Bragg has promised to start prosecuting gun possession. In the class showdown in New York, the working class is winning, no thanks to the highly educated elites who purport to give them their news. Washington Post columnist Catherine Rampell told Stelter, quote, the goal of this kind of coverage about crime is to freak people out, to cause them to live in fear. To Rampell, COVID and climate change are the real threats. Someone should tell her that more children died of gun violence in Chicago in 2021 than died of COVID. Let me repeat that. More children were killed by gun violence in Chicago in 2021 than died of COVID. How are we talking about anything else, Robbie?
Yeah, you know, I think it used to be the case that before that the media was overplaying crime, particularly local media throughout the aughts, when people did think crime was worse than it actually is. If you looked at the statistics, you know, we had horrific crime throughout the 80s, early 90s, and then we had this really wonderful drop-off in crime through the later 90s and the aughts. But now we are seeing that. It's inarguable. It is reversing. We can argue about what the cause of it is. I think shutting down all social services because of the pandemic for a year was probably a bad idea. Closing the community, churches, you know, things that help the at-risk, you know, the small number of at-risk people, the kind of people who might commit crime if society collapses. Well, society collapsed and they started committing crime. But it is terrible. And yeah, it's like you said, there are places where more people are dying of crime. And we're still talking about, like, masks. Like, that's what the mayors of these cities care about, that you're wearing masks, or that were you social distanced when you were shot?
Right.
Like, it's crazy.
Yeah, no, I think it's totally true. You know, there was a problem with how crime was covered for a long time. It was covered in a very racist way. There was a problem with how we responded to it. You know, we had these racist policies, you know, crack cocaine being criminalized at 100 times the rate of powder cocaine, essentially criminalizing being black and being poor. Stop and frisk, discriminatory, racist. Unconstitutional, humiliating young men of color for no reason. You know, 90% of the stops were black and Latino young men, and 70% yielded nothing. But there has to be a way to make neighborhoods safe for working class people and poor people that is not doing that. And I don't understand why, you know, we on the left are not saying this is our number1 issue.
Yeah, it has to be, even just for political reasons, because it's, like you said, it's going to inspire a massive backlash. Yeah. Because there is the sense that things are getting worse on this front is correct. It's not, you know, it's not every play. It's different in some cities, different in others. And as far as I can tell, Republican leader in the small areas that have crime problems controlled by Republicans, they don't seem to be doing much better either. But the Democratic approach is not working, and the way they're talking about in the media, it'll never work if that's how they're characterizing it.
And I think too often, because the media sets the agenda and tells politicians what they can get away with and what they can't get away with, when the liberal media downplays crime, they are telegraphing to politicians who, are presiding over these cities where it's rising, you don't have to do anything about this. We're not going to make a big deal about it. And I really think that's horrible. I mean, blood is on our hands, Robbie. Yeah,
and you're so right about the places the media live that, well, they're not having this problem, but just a couple miles away. And this is true in anywhere in the world. Like, you can go to Afghanistan or somewhere even more destroyed by, you can find, well, this neighborhood's totally fine. This neighborhood was destroyed by troops rampaging across, and it's random. But we hate to see that happening in our own in our own streets, in our own cities. Yeah. Well, anyway, we'll have our rising panel right after this, so stick around for that.